Their next guest I met for the first time yesterday, Sam Radocchia. And we sat down, I had her on the podcast, it'll be coming out next week. Never met her ever. We sat there and talked for 45 straight minutes like I've known her for years. One of the smartest people I've met in a long, long time. So she goes by Sam Rad for short. Sam, Samantha, and Radocchia. If you saw how her name's spelled, Rad makes it much easier. So she is an entrepreneur, keynote speaker, author, emerging tech advocate, combines both the mindsets of an anthropologist, she has an anthropology degree, and also technology. She's leaving tonight to go to LA for another speech, flying back the next day for a wedding in her family. This woman's all over the place. She's been, delivering keynote speeches globally to Fortune 500 corporations, trade associations, conferences, you name it. I mean, literally her bio is like 8 pages long, but I'm gonna stop there because I want more time for her to get up here. So without further ado, Sam Rad.
Hello, how's everyone doing today? It's good, got some energy? So it's really nice to be here and to share with you a bit about what I call the operating system for the future. So this idea of decentralized industry, decentralized society, the way that we've really shifted, particularly in respect to how we form trust and consensus as human beings. So I'll start with a story. When I was 16, I did my first study abroad experience, had never been out of the country. And of course, during this time, we didn't have phones, cell phones at least with maps. I used a map to get from place to place. So fast forward 10 years, so I'm 26 at this point in time. I moved to San Francisco to start my third company. And I hadn't been there, I hadn't lived there. And so what do I do on the first day? I unpack my apartment and I open this app. You see it, Uber, right? And I don't even need to know where I'm going, right? I just input the directions I get from point A to point B. And so, does anyone remember this in this room? I'm sure we do. Crumpled up, sitting probably in the front seat of a car. So in the late 90s, early 2000s, companies like MapQuest were looking at wayfinding technologies. So look at Google, enter this little player called Google and Google Maps, and they did something different. They said, we're going to not just focus on wayfinding, we're going to look at this in respect to data. And we're going to do something that no one at the time is going to think to do, and we're going to share that. We're going to open source it, and we're going to let people build on top of it, which is insane, right? This is like antithetical to every business model at the time. But then we see over the next 20 years, the rise of ride-sharing, food delivery that I'm sure we've all experienced a little too much over the past 2 years. We have location-based home sharing. We have reviews. We even have dating, right? And so the question is, how did we go in a relatively short period of time from this map or this way of life to these apps? And really, of course, there was a convergence of technologies at the time that enabled this. But really, it was an evolution in thinking. It was this thought to say, let's open up the data, let's share the data, and have people build on top of that. And that unlocked trillions of dollars of value over the past 2 decades. So we're at this moment in time, again. We're in the midst of a radical evolution, both of accelerating exponential technologies, but more importantly, the evolution of thought and thinking, how we shape societies, how we shape businesses, and how we interact. And so I want to take us through a little journey, not too far into the past, but what I call these operating systems of society. So from the past, which was mostly localized civilization societies, to now we're in a globalized world, of course, globally connected, with trust that's largely centralized, and then where we're going in the future, which is this decentralized industry concept. So when I say operating systems, do I mean operating systems in computing? Yes, we have them there. We also have them in nature. It's really just the way that resources are advocated. We also have that in society. So our social norms, trust, institutions, schools, right? We have this operating system. And that's really what I'm talking about here when I'm talking about operating systems. So in the past, a little story. So this is a rock. It's a special rock. It's called a zebra rock. That's not the scientific name, but as a child, we'd find these rocks in our backyard. I grew up in Connecticut, so not too far from here. We'd start collecting the rocks. We're like, they're beautiful, let's hoard them. And it turned into a whole thing where we had buckets and buckets of these rocks, because we were using them, my brothers and I, as a currency. And we'd trade the rocks, we'd trade for things that we would sell, like from our closets or our toys. And it turned into something where there's so many rocks, the neighborhood started doing this. So all the kids in the neighborhood started collecting their rocks. If there was a lemonade stand, we'd use the zebra rocks. If the ice cream truck came by, we convinced the guy to accept the rocks, which I'm sure our parents were paying some cold hard cash in the background. But really, we got to this point where there were so many rocks, and there was a little economy forming here that we had no idea the amount of rocks in circulation. People were loaning them. There were different prices and values for these rocks. So we said, we need a bank. And this is my brother, Mike. He was good at math and supposedly responsible. So we made him the bank, the first bank of zebra rocks. And he was in charge of setting the supply, loaning people rocks if they needed them, until one day, I was rummaging in his bedroom, and I find this suitcase under his bed, and it's hoarding rocks that he was keeping for himself and giving to the girl that he had a crush on down the street. Then he ran away with my other brother. We've never seen him again. He's taken the rocks, and that was that. But it's a cute story, right? But I hope I see him telling all these stories about him here on stage. But so, really, it's a little microcosm, an anecdote of how, societies, we had trust-based in community. It was face-to-face. We knew my brother in this case. So communication, exchange, supply chains, they were localized. You would be kind of getting your resources from the people down the street that you knew. And there were problems, obviously, with this operating system. It's extremely limited, expensive, smaller in scope, inefficient. And so we evolved. We went from this village to a connected village to a globally connected village. Again, with the convergence of these technologies, global supply chains, communication networks that brought us to where we are today, this present. So again, communications digitized. It's global. So we're placing now that trust that perhaps we had face-to-face in proxies, basically. So institutions, governments, financial institutions, educational systems, healthcare systems. So we've kind of deferred that trust. And really, a lot's changed, but not too much, right? We've just taken the problems of the past and we've brought them to the future. And so where we are in the present, anything from our finances to our data to what we buy, to what we eat, to ultimately what we learn and know, is centralized. There are numerous points of both control and points of failure in these types of systems. In turn, the systems are opaque. When you share your data with a third-party company or social network, we trust that, we know what's happening with it, but we really don't know. Or when we buy our food at the grocery store, or we take a medication, we trust that supply chain and all the steps in between. Silos. Now we have data silos, company silos, communication silos, government silos. So again, all these problems have led to kind of a fragmentation, which ultimately is reactive. So when there's a problem or something happens in the system, it can take days or weeks to figure out where that problem is versus a proactive system. And ultimately, of course, regulations, regulatory compliance. So you think keeping up with these ladies is tough. Keeping up with the regulations and compliance is also tough. And we have all of these safeguards in place, of course, to protect a system that has now evolved to be global in scale, but with trust proxies. And so again, we trust in these systems, but only kind of. And I bring you to 2008, and this is not a talk advocating for Bitcoin, but this was a time where we kind of saw this first start of crisis of trust, particularly in the financial system. And this was also a time that we saw the emergence of a new paradigm, a new way of thinking. And so again, shortly after 2009, the Bitcoin white paper was published, and beyond the idea of a trustless global financial system that it proposed, it's really this idea of a blockchain or of a decentralized way of institutionalizing or moving away from institutions for trust. So that brings us to the future, right? This concept of what could a future look like in this new paradigm. And so again, we take all of these challenges that we've faced in the present and past systems, and we say, look, okay, we're now in this new context, this globalized, connected, digitally mediated world, and what could that look like? And perhaps it shifts to be slightly more open, transparent, proactive instead of reactive. We're seeing now the emergence, of course, of autonomous, anything basically, or AI. So we're really looking at that. And of course, there's an underpinning for this operating system, one technology being a blockchain, which is really, at this point, we probably all know what it is. But at the end of the day, it's a really badass digital ledger, right? If you think about the dawn of human communication, which is right here, it was accounting. It was a tablet, right, to record basically the farming cycles. And that's what allowed for the agrarian revolution to take place and for us to kind of come together in civilizations. And so we can imagine now, we take that, the dawn of communication, this tablet, magical tablet, okay, but now we maybe have a world where you might have your home sale recorded on something, and that's just done instantly without an intermediary. You might have a graduate degree earned, or your food purchase. And so we're thinking about, again, this more open system. And there's a convergence of ideas and technologies here. It's not just about, if you've heard, let's say, crypto or cryptocurrencies or NFTs or digital assets or Web3, this big concept. It's all kind of tied into one, which is this shift to, again, a decentralized future. And I would be remiss if I didn't have a little something here on the metaverse. I know there's more deep dive on that later. But really, again, we have this idea now where this decentralization is happening, but we also have this talk of the metaverse. What is it? Where is it? Will we all be in the matrix? And so Neil Stephenson, who coined the term in 1992, his book Snow Crash, said it's a persistent virtual world that reaches, interacts with, and affects nearly every part of human existence. So if you take anything away from this concept, it doesn't have to be in some virtual world or in this augmented reality. It's just the idea of almost ubiquitous computing. We all probably have a phone in our pocket at this point in time, maybe an Apple Watch. It's already around you. The data's around you. Every aspect of life. And so again, we're having this convergence now of these technologies. Of course, you have the decentralizing technologies, but you also have technologies like VR and AR, quantum computing, new types of payment rails, 5G, sensors, and it's kind of coming to create this shift into a ubiquitous metaverse-like life. And so every aspect of society is becoming digitized now. And that's why it's important we start thinking about, okay, societies of the past were not like this. And now we're shifting into this new realm. And it has massive impacts on everyday life. So I could go through pretty much every aspect of society here, and we'd be here for 7 hours, so I will not do that. But let's look at one, okay, money, right? This is a myth. This is what it looks like. It's these rocks or cash. But no, it's zeros and ones. It's data. It's moving. It's neither here nor there or present at all. It could even look like this. It could be a cryptocurrency. It could be a digital asset that any of your kids are collecting, perhaps in Minecraft or Roblox. Maybe that's their money. So we're really looking at a new operating system here for value and the concept of what actually a currency or store of value can be. And again, you might have a cryptocurrency. You might have a central bank reserve currency where central banks are coming into play and digitizing their financial systems, which, of course, it's already happening. If you look here on the countries that are already kind of making the shift or have already launched or piloting a completely virtual or digitized financial system, we're actually quite ahead here. So in the US, you're seeing this with the Treasury exploring digital dollar. We're seeing it also on the tax side. We're seeing it with, of course, using these new payment rails for high-frequency trading or other things. So the idea is, even in financial services, we're seeing this shift, both decentralized, but also to slightly more algorithmic, efficient, connected, autonomous. Identity, this is a big concept, right? I mean, who who am I? I'm simultaneously here on a stage talking to all you folks, but I could also be this person, maybe. And I'm also maybe this person. And perhaps off in a different world doing this right now, too, all at the same place and time, right? We have this concept of different identities. And so the question is, what is identity, or let's say KYC for this audience in the future, when the concept of the physical existence is shifting to multi-existences of either digital or virtual representations of the self in different virtual worlds, or even teams, so companies that have teams that are completely anonymous. I think 2 months ago, maybe 3 months ago now, Twitter has hired a completely anonymous person identity that's just a string of characters. I'm sure on the back end for their on the ops side, the person has an identity. But the question is, what do we start to do? What does that mean for our lives, our work, our being, our kids' schools, when the idea of identity is shifting? Another area to look at is the concept of private property, asset ownership, right? This is another core pillar of civilization, let's say, or kind of modern society, the concept of private property. And we're now having sort of a new model of what property or ownership is. So a story, Matt mentioned, I'm trained as an anthropologist. I studied or lived in a virtual world called Second Life in 2010. And now, of course, this conversation has come back a little bit. But I was very interested in, what is this world? People, I'd go to concerts there. People are socializing. There were dinner parties. There were dates. There were clothing shopping. And I got a little overzealous with the clothing shopping for my avatar, so I needed to make money. I was like, I need money in this world. And there was even ATMs and bankings where you could come and put your US dollars in and get the Linden dollar, which was the currency in this world, to participate in the world. And I was like, I need money. I can't just keep putting money in. I was, grad student, didn't have a lot of it. And so I was like, well, I like these clothes so much, so maybe I'll make digital T-shirts and sell them to people. It was super easy. You just kind of clip art at the time, not even Photoshop. So the thing is, I started selling these T-shirts and making money, Linden dollars, in the world. And the thing that changed after that, which was completely insane, because at that point in time, all you could do is put money into the system, not take it out. So, great business model for them. But then all of a sudden, these exchanges started popping up, sort of on weird places on the internet or eBay. It'd be like peer-to-peer things. And then they ultimately launched an exchange. So all that money I was making in the world now became cold, hard cash in the real world for me. My mind was blown, because it's like, this is not a real T-shirt. This is not a real world. But for a lot of people, this is a space that they spent time in, and that asset, that idea of that shirt, was quite valuable. And so we're seeing this emergence now of a shift in thinking around property ownership and private property, both who owns it, especially in a digital context. So you don't actually really own anything if it's on the internet. The companies that you're using the platform, own that. And so if we're thinking about a world where, again, it's digitally mediated and ubiquitous, we've got to start thinking about the concept of private property, intellectual property, what ownership means, right? We as individuals should own those assets, whatever they are, whether it's a digital currency, it's a digital T-shirt, it's your digital diploma. All of these things are important. Finally, work, right? The concept of work. We've already experienced this shift. So I don't have to talk about decentralization of, in-office to remote work to hybrid. And even work is changing to be playing video games or doing activities that are not necessarily feeling like work, or in these kind of terrible virtual contexts that aren't quite landing yet. But really the shift, when we're thinking of the nature of businesses, of work, and what, in the next 10 to 20 years, the types of businesses you'd be looking at, the question here is not, will the workforces be remote, but will people work for companies in general? And so we're seeing this shift. Starting with millennial generation, but more Gen Z, of course, the creator economy. Kids these days are growing up wanting to be YouTube stars and TikTok influencers and Minecraft players versus an astronaut. Hopefully that'll change. But really, we think about this idea beyond the gig economy, beyond just kind of people doing one or two things while in employment with one company. But it's also this idea of a multi-earner area or decentralized companies where you might contribute essentially as a freelancer, but also have many identities, have many participations in many different value-sharing networks. And that's a big thought, not just about companies and investments, but what sorts of companies would be really the things to look at in the future. And so ultimately, every aspect, these are just, I think, 5 aspects of society, but everything is changing. Again, as I said, we could go through pretty much every facet of our lives of society, from supply chains to transportation, entertainment, community, and we'd see these changes. We'd see the shifts towards digitization, decentralization. The question here is, like, if we're now moving into this day in the life of a not-so-distant future, let's say this is Bob, he gets up, he has his personalized meal delivery shake come to his house that's tailored to his unique genetic code, and he puts on his haptic suit and his VR goggles, and he hops into work. And his work is controlling an avatar in space that's repairing some sort of satellite from, I don't know, his living room. He's jealous because his friend has, the brain-machine interface, which is way more immersive, so he's wanting that promotion. And maybe his daughter is like in the other room, right, in her same suit, and she's visited what was once the White House. Now it's just kind of a virtual representation of it, and you can go on the tours there. She doesn't even have to travel, right? Or perhaps it's slightly less immersive. Maybe this is closer to where we are today, this augmented reality metaverse, again, where perhaps you walk down the street and you see real time, the names of everyone in this room, so I don't need that name tag to recognize you, or you see the pricing of certain things at the store, and it's still a bit overwhelming, right? It's not necessarily a world that I think we want to live in or should live in, but these shifts are happening. And again, I make these points to bring back the point I said, that every aspect of our lives will be connected and digitized. I don't want to put my opinions in here. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know, but the reality is that's the shift that's happening. It's already started to happen. We spend a lot of time connected through our devices. We're sharing a lot of data on our devices, so it's only going to be more and more prevalent. And the question is, how do we structure and govern this world, this ubiquitous computing era, this decentralized era? And this is where I bring in decentralization, decentralized industry. That's why it's important, especially in the question of who owns the metaverse. So Tim Sweeney, CEO of Epic Games, arguably one of the companies that is positioned to be quite ahead. Any of the game engine or game companies are well positioned in this space. But quite honestly says if one central company, his included, owns this metaverse, and I use it loosely, I mean this era of ubiquitous computing of every aspect of our lives being connected, they'll be more powerful than any government, and be a god on earth was his line. And again, we already see this with companies larger than nation states, with more power than nation states, with the power to influence elections. And I bring it back to my time in Second Life of, what if I built up my whole life there? What if my empire was selling T-shirts, and one day, Linden Labs was like, we don't like Sam, so we're going to shut down her store and delete her shop or delete her identity, the person, and all the things that I had thought I owned, maybe my degrees I earned in this world. And, it's a big question, and yet here we are. We're in this era of this metaverse race, right? We've got every massive company looking here to say, okay, we're going to kind of vie for our little bit of control over this, whether it's the whole thing, whether it's some of the building blocks, again, the VR, the haptics, the payment rails. And so right now, we're still kind of taking these problems of the past. We're saying, okay, we're going to build this new era, but by private businesses solely for the purpose of commerce and data collection and the sale of virtual products and advertising, essentially. And we've taken this business model through probably 5 different phases now of the media evolution, and it's clear that with something so profound as connecting every human being on Earth through some sort of ubiquitous computing, it's really important to think about it. So there's two points I want you to take away from, because they're buzzwords you're probably hearing about, they're things you're thinking about in terms of investments. One, NFT, non-fungible token. And I'm not talking here about the apes and CryptoPunks and things that you buy as digital art, but really it's a standard for the decentralized ownership of these assets. So let's say my digital diploma, let's say my digital t-shirts, where I or you actually own that as opposed to the platform that it's on. So we see this, of course, with now gaming, digital goods, profile pics, collecting. You've probably seen, let's say, these avatars popping around for $250,000 or more, right? But you see the power in it, because these are the early experiments. I'm not saying go buy a Bored Ape, but I'm saying that if you understand the building blocks of the future, this will be a huge part of it, because it'll represent anything. Could be your physical car and the title to it. We see, again, Hermes jumping in with a digital version of the Birkin bag that also exists in real life. So it kind of acts as a certificate of authenticity. Second concept, DAO, decentralized autonomous organization. So you recall I talked about future of work a little bit here, and not just remote work, but really the idea of what is a corporate structure of the future. Because we, of course, now have this weird place between, of course, our traditional structures, LLC, C Corp, et cetera, and traditional concept of employee contractor. It's kind of rigid. It doesn't really fit, actually, for the way that the actual society is changing, work's changing. So this is an early experiment. It started, the first one, the DAO, was formed in 2016 as an investment collective. So people pooled basically $50 million into Ethereum, and ran an experiment to see if this collective could allocate funds in a different way, in a decentralized way, an autonomous way. That was hacked, so it was an interesting experiment, to say the least, and we've come a long way since then. So you're seeing these of people coming together to create them for the sake of investment, ownership, metaverse governance, asset governance. So really, we have asset ownership, but then what do you do with the governance of it? So one example, Lynx DAO. It's a group of people came together, raised about $10 million to buy a golf club, and all become members of it, and kind of disrupt that system and make a more decentralized version of it. Or the Constitution, so this was last year. Some of you might have seen it, but there was a copy, Sotheby's was selling a copy of the US Constitution, and so a group came together to raise, they ended up raising close to $46 million, I think, to try to buy this copy from Sotheby's. This is the auction. They didn't end up winning, but that's another concept. And then ultimately, we saw even recently with Patagonia, right, this idea of exiting or transferring the ownership of the company into a trust. And so we're seeing this era now of more, a new way of thinking about what a company is, what is collective value creation. And so I bring it back here, again, Fred Ursum saying, everything will be connected or tokenized someday. So that could be anything from, again, your day-to-day life, the food you buy, the clothes that you're wearing, the car that you drive, the home that you own. So we come back to this life on chain, this decentralized concept of society where these life's moments, right, are recorded but not necessarily owned or controlled by anyone. And that's why these two things are important. So take note of the little acronyms, because we're shifting. Again, I showed this shift of what a company looks like. We have company, founder, shares. It might be a decentralized autonomous organization. The NFTs represents the shares or maybe your participation in it. So I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the booms and the busts of this world, because I know there's definitely a lot of skepticism, myself included, because if you just watch the mainstream media, of course you'll hear about crypto, Bitcoin. Bitcoin has died 447 times, I think probably 600 times since I made this slide last week. You see the media and you said, oh, this is bull. You can't just look at price go up, go down. But if you really think about each phase of this evolution, we have had resets, we've had challenges in this space. So 2016, I mentioned the DAO, this experiment that was hacked. That's not the end of the world, because each time that there is a reset or we see these things in the media, the benefits accrue to the open source world. It's not innovation taking place in a walled garden or through some research lab like the early internet, which came mostly out of government research and educational research. This is the opposite evolution in technology. It's happening with all of you folks in this room, with all of the children of the world, building stuff every day. And so the point that I want to leave you with is that decentralizing technologies and the mindset shifts that are supporting them are still very, very young. Again, we're talking a little over a decade for these ideas starting to really materialize, and we're still just at the beginning of what is possible, not just from the financial side, but the way that life is going to shake out. And so, again, I'll say, while it's still very young, the future is now. We're here. We probably spend more time doing this already, right? We're living in the metaverse. The interface just isn't really great. So, it'll be interesting to see how that evolves. But we're at this moment, again, the sociocultural, geopolitical, technological paradigm shifts are converging all at this moment in time. It's kind of the perfect storm, right? And we're having these new ideas of governance, and we have new technologies coming together, and they kind of all fit under this pretense of a metaverse. And I, again, want to leave you with, this is really just the era of ubiquitous, globally connected, real-time computing, real-time connection. And it's incredibly important to approach that with responsibility. We all have the power here with our decisions, with our investment decisions as well, to support the technologies and the companies that will do this in a responsible way. And my time is up, so I'll leave it here and build a world that doesn't end up looking like this. So thank you so much for your time today, and I'll be around, so I look forward to meeting you all.